movies I consider to be very Singaporean are One Leg Kicking, Eating Air, Ilo Ilo, I'm Not Stupid.
I'm Not Stupid, one, caused havoc amongst my peers. Nobody would shut up about Lim Kay.
My favourite local movie is Seven Letters.
The first Singapore film I saw was Mee Pok Man.
I would say the ultimate Singaporean franchise is Money No Enough.
Our Boys to Men. Well, I guess the girls will never understand.
15 by Royston Tan.
Papayao, 12莲花.
Obviously Wonderland, totally not biased at all.
If you've got Singlish, you know definitely it's Singaporean.
You know a film is Singaporean when it speaks to your Singaporean heart.
Testing 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. How have Singaporean movies
shape our cultural identity? Well, I think every society needs to have a mirror, and cinema is our mirror, right? This is where we see on the big screen our stories. We see this is what we look like, this is who we are.
I think Singaporean movies kind of mark where we are, where we are going, where we have been. Documentations of Singaporean life, which is very essential if you want to grow as a nation.
凡是没有交我的功课的，请自动出去。
I think you see all the markers of Singaporean life, whether it's HDB, National Service. You see all these iconic images in our cinema because cinema should reflect life, all the things around us which are our Singaporean identity.
So the 1950s and 1960s are considered the golden age of Singapore cinema. And this was when almost 300 Malay films were made in that 20 years. And of course, one of the most famous of all Malay stars was P. Ramlee.
P. Ramlee was a huge contributor to the golden age of cinema pre-independence.
He could sing, he could compose, he was a musician, he was an actor, he was a director.
He was actually Malaysian, but he shifted to Singapore to make films from the late 40s until, I think, mid-60s when we gained independence.
Not many people remember that we had a studio system making pretty good movies pre-independence. All of them were actually making films in Singapore.
Of course, with the Malay films, with Cathay Chris and Shaw pushing out all these films for the wider Malaya audiences, we actually had a very, very rich history.
I think the question for us is, did we feel that those were Singaporean films while the industry was very vibrant?
Many of the films at that time were about building the Malayan identity, which might not have been as relatable to those of us in Singapore, especially when we were moving towards independence.
You know, every time we look back on this moment when we signed this agreement which severed Singapore from Malaysia, it will be a moment of anguish.
I think for cinema, we kind of took a backseat. After independence, during the nation building years, we were all on survival mode. Singapore was very much into modernization, industrialization, providing housing. In the 70s and 80s, TV programs were very available. You just turned on the TV and you could get entertainment. You didn't have to go to the cinema. When you don't have audiences, you can't make money. Production studios closed and went overseas to bigger and better markets.
It was a cultural desert for Singapore cinema in the 70s going to the 80s.
Definitely in the 1980s, no local feature films were made at all.
Thanks to a group of ardent film lovers, the Singapore International Film Festival was started in 1987, and that was a huge milestone. That inspired a lot of people in Singapore to see that it's important to tell your own stories.
Certainly that has been a platform for local aspiring filmmakers to network with international filmmakers as well as programmers.
that was the platform that gave that opportunity to say, yes, let's go do our first Singapore movie in a long time, and that would be Mee Pok Man in 1995.
Mee Pok Man was the first Singaporean feature film directed, written, produced and shot by Singaporeans.
Wow. Time stands still at Huabi. Same old nice marble top. These are the chairs. So it's that nice moment, right, when you have Bunny having too much beer, struggling before she gets knocked down. Well, that's all pretty much as it was. Wow, still standing. 30 years ago, we were here. I feel like a dinosaur. But good that, sometimes spaces still remain the same. That's important. I had this good friend called Damien Sin who passed me these collections of horror stories to illustrate, and there'd be one story that just stayed in my mind for so long called One Last Cold Kiss. And it was about a mortuary attendant who falls in love with a fresh cadaver and brings her home, and they have a relationship. So there was one night at Newton Circus, drinking cheap Anchor beer and eating mee pok. I suddenly thought, wow, maybe we should take this short story, One Last Cold Kiss, and call it Mee Pok Man. It would no longer be a mortuary attendant, but it'd be a mee pok seller. Something that a lot of Singaporeans can connect with, right? Actually, the incredible thing with Mee Pok Man was no one in the production had done a feature film before. The only person that we had who had done feature films was the celebrated Lim Kay Tong. I still remember when I approached Lim Kay Tong, I said, look, we're doing a film with no budget. Would you help us and be one of the characters? And oh my God.
Bye.
It's so good to see you. This location was our first location because I remember when we got here, it was like 6:30 in the morning. Kay Tong was here sitting down, they're doing his hair and all that, right? But I don't know, it's just everything that could go wrong went wrong on the first day. I think about 11 o'clock, the owner was telling my producer, Brian, get out or you don't come back tomorrow. I felt so bad looking at Kay Tong sitting there the whole day, not one single shot of him. So I remember I went up to him and said, hey, I'm so sorry, dude. I mean, keep you waiting here from 6:30 in the morning. And he looks at me and he was just, Hollywood is slower.
Yes.
Oh my God.
It takes forever to
what
light.
A godsend. So when it came down to the casting of Mee Pok Man, and in the case of Mike Gore, the baddie in the film, which was you.
Hello, you.
Damien and I, we had you in mind as the character, and we knew that we had to ask you to speak Cantonese to be more accurate, right? For that character.
I remember Eric introducing me to the number 2 pimp of the area, and to see someone in the flesh who was actually the embodiment of my character. Hey, it was a very rare opportunity that you don't really get when you're given a role. It just gave me a solid foundation for the character Mike Korn.
Looking back at Mee Pok Man, I think it definitely captured a slice of Singapore that's no longer there. It was romantic, beautiful, and it was the first time Singaporeans could hear dialect on the big screen, which was a no-no for a while. I think it's a little bit less sterile than maybe what the authorities would have liked of the film, but it had heart and vigor, and it was a brutal sort of underbelly take of Singapore that nobody really had seen.
With a film like Mee Pok Man that very, very strongly featured characters which are on the fringe, a lot of people may start to think of Singapore indie films to always be featuring dark stories and dark characters. But you would totally understand why, because everything that you could see on free-to-air television has to be PG-13. So if you wanted to tell more mature stories, you wanted to tell more difficult kind of narratives, you would have to make it in film. Because the film ratings were then up to R21. But that came obviously with a catch. With Mee Pok Man being rated R21, the public's access to the film was severely limited because of the classification and censorship policies of that time, which actually still continues to now. Movies which are R21 can only be seen in the city centre and not in heartland cinemas.
The censors say the film is going to be RA unless I take out 7 moments from the film.
By 1990, about 80% of Singaporeans were living in HDB flats.
So 12 Stories featured HDB living, something that a great proportion of our people can identify with.
My cameraman loves the HDB block because he lives in one and he wanted to make it look as beautiful as possible. He saw it as iconic and loves the look of the fluorescent lights in HDB blocks. So 12 Stories happens on a Sunday, and it's got 3 interwoven stories, 3 situations that happen in an apartment block in Singapore.
干什么？一大早的。我要干什么？你还看不出吗？
I think it was like a commentary on what was happening in Singapore at the time. It was those articles that we read in the papers.
So this week, while Pa and Ma are away, you two must be home by 10 p.m. every night.
Are you joking?
I'm perfectly serious.
There were a lot of very interesting social human interest stories that may have sort of weaved into the plots and parts of those 3 segments that we had in the film. So it is essentially Singaporean and that period. So with 12 Stories, I really wanted the PG rating because my first feature, Mee Pok Man, had the RA, and the problem with that was that it's limited screens. I wanted a bigger audience, so I had to fight to get this PG for 12 Stories. The film goes to censors, and they say the film is going to be RA unless I take out 7 moments from the film. And one of those moments was when you have the Trini Fung character telling the Jack Neo character in the film that his willy is the size of a toothpick.
因为你的小弟弟，还真的是小弟弟呢，看不清楚的人还以为是牙签呢。
Which is ludicrous. I mean, it's a funny little joke, right? So I said, look, I really can't take out all this, right? I mean, it's not fair. And so they say just remove this bit about this special tiger balm ointment that will protect you from any prostitute. So with that done, then, you know, I was allowed to keep the other shots.
在北京的时候，你告诉我，你搞的是饮食的，同时你也是老板。如果我嫁给你的话呢，我就是老板娘。结果呢，你看看你搞的是什么饮食？
卖永岛湖吗？永岛湖也是饮食的一种吗？
The China bride story was inspired by a lot of the newspaper articles at the time. These Chinese brides coming into Singapore to find a good catch. And it was really funny because I had met Jack and he says, hey, you're doing a film, can I be in it? I said, Jack, I can't afford you. He goes, never mind, I do for cheap. But then the character in the film needs to be very ugly and you're far from ugly. He goes, never mind, I got something, I show you. And he shows me these fangs that was part of some sitcom prop, right? And he goes, look at this. Now I look ugly, right, with flying teeth. He goes, do I get the role? I said, yeah, sure, you get it, right? Because of course I wanted Jack. I mean, he was so famous back then. I thought it was really nice of him to come on board.
What do you want to do with your life?
What, you think I cannot get a job?
2 O levels. What kind of job are you gonna get? Huh? Selling McDonald's hamburgers, is it? Huh? Is that what you want?
So in the case of this story, Sister's Keeper, we had Khoo Pin as a theatre actor, and we had Lum May Yee, who had never acted before, but we had
I
opened.
heard my name.
Oh my God! Long life, long life.
Hi,
How are
Eric.
you?
Mwah. Mwah. Good to see you.
Good seeing you.
Who's this guy?
Just a friend.
Is he a boyfriend?
Tell him I'm not ready lah.
Anyway, as what I was saying, okay, Lum May Yee, ooh, incredible entrance. She played Trixie,
Yes.
the unfortunate sister of the Boon Pin character in 12 Stories.
So I've never acted prior to 12 Stories, and of course Boon Pin, he's such a good actor. He made it quite easy to act with him, so he could like carry me along, you know, and make me feel things that I should be feeling in the scene that I was doing with him.
Yeah, the last scene of 12 Stories.
The one that we fought.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one that he slapped me.
Yeah, it was really scary because it was this confrontation.
It was very
scene at the end,
intense.
right?
And you know, Boon Pin is really in character, right?
May, did you have fun tonight?
We shot on the RE Super 16 and we had 2 small cameras because for that climatic scene we had to capture it essentially in that one first take, right? And I tell you, I was in the room next door, I could feel the whole place vibrate, right?
I was doing it since I was 15. No, 13. Are you happy not?
Actually, there were a few other girls that we were thinking about also to play the role of Trixie, but she was the best. She just like really aced it.
Oh, thank you.
I just loved the way everything panned out with this film, you know, like actors and non-actors. 12 Stories was stories that we felt for and also what felt contemporary at the time, you know. Horrible people parking in the handicap slot, whatever that was circa that era.
Michael Pay!
Michael Pay lah, 变麦哥。
All of us who live in HDB flats know that it's not always hunky-dory or gotong royong spirit all the time. And so that's why when 12 Stories came out, it was incredibly exciting to see different lives and not something that was just a cherry-picking sort of rosy picture of HDB living.
Eric Khoo's shift from the very art house Mee Pok Man to the more accessible 12 Stories also represented the start of an era of Singaporean cinema that was stylistically more accessible and addressed broader societal issues.
I think of gone shopping, consumerism. I think of Singapore Dreaming, which is about, you know, the 5 Cs.
Cash 的 credit card, car, condo, company club. 你们有没有听说过 6C 吗？那就是 coffee。
They resonated because these were Singaporean issues.
Nowadays, people look at what car you drive, what house you live in, what uni you go to. If you want to make it, you can look like you already made it.
And then we had money no enough.
我们一定要做能够跟大家 connect 的一种作品，所以啊，我们就自己写了一个剧本，叫“钱不够用”。为什么呢？因为我们觉得拍钱不够用，反映整个社会的现象，而且呢，也可以触到啊新加坡人最痛的一个地方，钱就是最痛的一个地方。
I think Jack Neo found the perfect topic reflecting the life of Singaporeans during this Asian financial crisis of 1997.
That sent shockwaves through Asian currency markets.
你进股票赢几十万 ？Then?
12万。
哈？
It let people vent to see the kind of pressures they went through, lives ruined by an economic crisis.
OK， 我跟你讲，我要钱，听到了没有？
And how it impacted on family, friends.
好笑的就是说，这部电影其实它的制作数字是真的是最差的。拍的时候，我们没有很照顾镜头，我们也很没有照顾收音，我们只是把一个故事写得很顺，然后呢，把一些人的心声用语言、用情节来表达。其实现在我们看，我们觉得是 fear 的。对我来讲，我说 Oh my God， 为什么我会拍这样的一个作品？可是，在那个时候，我觉得我们是别无选择的。
If you still can't settle your account, I'm sure you know what will happen to you. Bye.
尽管呢一边拍那个公司一边倒，一边拍车被拖走，没有钱，真正的钱不够用哦，在幕后是严重发生的。
Thus again, cinema reflects life, life reflects cinema in that sense.
And very critically, everybody sounded and looked like how we really do in real life.
頭腦邊知道寫嘴女女啫喎。我知啊，那幾聲當條咩標咯？我冇標咧，我叫浪標咯。
我们也不懂哪里来的胆子，我们就做了。说真的，那个时候也没有条规讲不可以嘛，暴力、血腥、色情都有尺寸来censor嘛。可是放映没有一个这样的一个尺寸，所以当时我们就是觉得没有讲不可以啊，就拍了。但是拍了之后呢，的确是有碰到一些阻力啦，啊，但是政府也发现到这部电影它跟讲华语没有抵触。因为我们戏里面讲福建话的人，就是我们现实生活里面看到的讲福建话的人，而且安哥安弟的那些。然后呢，小朋友都讲华语或者是讲英语。
爸爸是 hippopotamus。
所以呢，他们看了之后，觉得说这部戏真的是在体现一个当时的一个社会，而不是说在故意跟讲华语运动唱反调。这部戏才通过。
我其实今天叫你们2个来是要跟你们借钱的。
没有啦，我就叫你们2个出来，我是要跟你们借钱。
我要跟你们2个借钱。
没有，我要跟你们2个借钱的。上次我就听你说，你一天赚
The Money No Enough franchise really has themes that Singaporeans identify with. So much so that even the then Prime Minister mentioned the film in his National Day rally speech in 2008.
我知道最近梁志强拍了一部电影，钱不够用2季，用 ERP 来做文章，他反应快，很机灵，电影不错，政策不行。
那时候有几段情节算是真的很大胆啊，因为那时候大家对 ERP 其实是蛮痛恨的，很痛恨。可是你又没有办法，对不对？可是我们又知道政府没有这样做我们一直塞车也不行啊。所以呢，我觉得呢，它是一个介于很矛盾的。可是呢，大家就是想发泄一下啦，所以呢，我们就拍了那个戏，大家把那个 ERP 拿出来，从那个桥那边丢下去，然后变成一个艺术品。
特别安妮master 不怕生呢，干脆把它变成雕塑品，让外婆来拍照赚钱。只要可以赚钱的话，又可以环保，政府抛support的吼。
I think 有一些人不太开心这个东西。
我说真的，新加坡人不敢做这种大动作的。
为什么呢？
演戏啦，为什么
We also cannot forget that Jack had I Not Stupid, a very successful franchise reflecting on the educational system in Singapore.
喂，哎呦，才拿35分呢，还给我，接看而已嘛。喂，还我，才拿45分，还给我。
我为什么要开始写小孩不笨？主要也是因为呢，我们的整个教育的环境在那个时候呢，有一个 EM3，我也是觉得是非常不对的。因为我觉得小孩子的开窍，他可能不一定是在3年级还是4年级嘛。然后有很多孩子，尤其是我有一些朋友的孩子就无缘无故的被打入了 EM3 的那个班级里面，就非常伤心。
读 EM3 恐怕没有得救了，不用练习。
对小孩子呢有一个阴影有一个阴影。所以那个时候呢，我想来想去呢，我觉得这个可能可以变成一个电影，因为那个时候我的孩子也大概就是那个年龄，所以变成是我很容易 connect 到当时的心情、反应各方面的。
Streaming in primary schools will be scrapped starting from 2008 to be replaced by subject-based banding. This means that rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, weaker students can take a combination of foundation and standard courses depending on what they are good at.
我不敢说是因为我的电影让政府改变了他们的策略，但是我觉得它一定有影响。
I think it created an impact that people were talking about issues, about policies in an accessible way. I think he just really knew that people wanted their experiences validated, and he did it through film, and it clicked.
我比较喜欢说我的作品能够与时并进，可能我的情节是虚构的，但是我觉得它还是会挂钩，跟你挂钩。挂钩了之后呢，你会去想一下，因为我觉得你看一部电影，哪怕它是有夸张，它还是会跟你有关系的，就看你用什么角度去探讨这样。
作为一个华人，华文华语一定要懂，因为这是我们的母语，我们的根。
I felt that for the longest time, when we talk about Singaporean films, it's always about the voices of the majority demographics.
Discussions around foreign domestic workers peaked in the periods from about 2008 and 2013, especially in the news.
Starting next year, it will be mandatory for Singapore employers to give their foreign maids a day off per week.
With more women entering the workforce, there was a higher reliance on helpers in our households, and more of us were being raised by them instead of our parents.
So very naturally then, it would mean that of course they are part of our narratives on screen. And so it was almost just a matter of time before that first Singapore movie that would have a domestic helper as a protagonist, and it was Anthony Chen's Ilo Ilo.
I am your maid, but I didn't come here to be bullied. Enough. Go and do your work, don't be careful.
Ilo Ilo is about the relationship of a Filipino helper and a 10-year-old Singapore boy. I grew up with a Filipino helper. She left when I was 12 years old. And the reason why the film is called Ilo Ilo is because that's where she's from. And like the character in the film, her name is Teresa, and we call her Auntie Terry. It's not autobiographical, but I think there were a lot of memories from my own past that I took inspiration from.
Kenapa Pak Harun? Cukup. Aku tak sendiri.
Sayang Disayang is about an Indonesian domestic worker who comes to Singapore to work for a disabled Singaporean employer.
If you look at Sayang Disayang, it talks about what we are facing, an aging population whereby aftercare needs to be given by, again, non-Singaporeans.
You can see her. Hey.
做什么你？
The two films obviously are quite different, but both depict, I suppose, the domestic help situations in Singapore.
Kalau nak masak sambal goreng, masaklah betul-betul. Mahal sangat ke belacan, sampai tak mampu nak taruh cukup-cukup. Kalau garam dah tak ada kat pasar tu, kau pergi je tepi laut Pasir Ris. Dekat je, depan rumah je. Pergi, jenguk air laut, bikin garam. Babal punya perempuan.
I feel that when my film came out, and of course Ilo Ilo before that, it puts a spotlight on having domestic workers and other migrant workers who are basically here to build Singapore.
In the end, it's always an economic reason. In Singapore, both parents need to work. It needs to be a dual income family because they've got bills to pay, they've got a mortgage. Someone has to look after the children. Even though we're encouraging more births, right? We want families to have more children, but who's going to take care of them? It's the hiring of domestic helpers.
Your hair very tall. I help you wash your hair. What? Oi! Let's start.
Jaga rumah baik-baik Bapak makan
makan tau. Jangan tak makan. Biar cepat baik. Okey, Muni. Terima kasih
When I was doing Sayang Disayang, what comes to mind is the idea of, this Asian filial piety. Traditionally, we were raised by our own parents, right? So now the situation is that when our parents are older and they need us the most, we have these domestic workers to take over our place. Basically, strangers, right? We put them in the house to look after our parents. As much as we want to look after our parents ourselves, but then again, economic reasons, right? We have to be out there and work.
Jay, come.
When I made Ilo Ilo, it felt like it was one of the first times where, the character of a foreign domestic helper is seen sort of front and center. All of a sudden, we watch them as human beings. And I think that was quite startling. It's the first time you had to really confront it. I remember there were Singapore audiences that said, this feels a little bit too real. Like you're having to look at yourself in a mirror. And somehow it has sort of captured, I think, the Singapore zeitgeist of the dual income family, the pressures of work, of having to raise a child, of growing up, of class struggles, migration.
I felt that for the longest time, when we talk about Singaporean films, it's always about the voices of the majority demographics. Sayang Disayang was written when I did not see a lot of Malay voices in Singaporean films. Why isn't there someone doing stories about Singapore from the Malay perspective? And then I look at myself, hey son, if you are a filmmaker, why don't you do it?
Nasihat cucu kakek turutin.
We need to have a voice that faithfully represent the Singaporean voice, because Singapore is made of a lot of races, a lot of cultures, a lot of migrants as well.
Abang, hiburlah hati yang sepi, janganlah.
Sayang Disayang is my urgent need to feel represented on screen, especially when we talk about Singaporean films, Singaporean stories.
Marilah kita ketawa. We haven't done enough in terms of representation, and by that I mean when it comes down to minority stories, their stories are equally important. Their stories are our stories as well.
I think there's a lot more stories that we can tell if we kind of diversify or even shift away from stories that are related to race and just talk about our experience as Singaporeans.
I want to see my family!
When I first saw A Yellow Bird, I felt like it was a necessary story that I hadn't seen before. And it wasn't a story about racial minorities because there were different communities represented. And this kind of made that film very universal and relatable across races.
A Yellow Bird is about a man who's fallen off the grave. My mom used to say, if you see a yellow bird, make a wish. You'll hear good news or meet good people. So in the story, that's what I'm exploring. Does he find hope in his journey, looking for his family, trying to balance his relationship with his mom, the people that he meets along the way? I had to draw some things from some of my own experiences. I had a bit of a difficult relationship with my mom because we never saw eye to eye on a lot of things. I think that whole relationship where she doesn't speak to him, I brought it to an extreme.
Raja doesn't know that I'm here, and I'm going to go and crash this interview.
I was young, I was abrasive, I was, tough. Hey, Siva, sorry, I'm doing an interview.
Yeah, I know. I'm part of it.
Oh, really?
How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. And my inspiration is actually this location that we are in right now. And you know, the people that I encountered, people who are marginalized, people who do not have a voice, people who are not visible to the normal person walking on the street.
Siva.
I've known Siva for a very long time, prior to making The Yellow Bird. And I've always found Siva to be very intuitive, instinctive, and hardworking. So I had to cast him, and he was just right. I won't lie, I wrote the part for him. That's why the name Siva was in the script.
I feel an actor-director relationship should be where you surrender. The actor should surrender.
And he surrendered.
You know, I never once watched any of the playback during the production of A Yellow Bird. That's how much of trust I have in him.
The younger generation had not seen Maud Road, the one-room flats, the narrow corridors. They did not believe that it was Singapore. The block is still here.
Yep, but it's changed a lot, this area.
I thought they demolished it, you know. This is where you had that scene with Udaya, right? Where you had that big fight.
Select! No wonder they get it.
And this is, you know, where you slept with the cardboard when she threw you out of the house. Shall we go up and have a look?
You want to go? You want to walk down the corridor?
I want to see the corridor. But I can't remember the floor though. I think 5th. I think it's towards the end, I remember. Maybe it's this one.
Or is it that house?
No, it could be this one. It could be this one. Yeah, it's this one. Because you had the window that you look through when she throws the things out. It's this one.
This whole stretch has changed. It looks much cleaner and brighter.
It's amazing. Shall we walk down?
Memory lane, is it? Acting in this movie, it humbled me. You know, looking at like Maud Road. I've never been to that area.
I think this film created a certain kind of awareness that there were people who existed on the sidelines and who were not really seen very often or who are not in mainstream films. The protagonist happened to be Indian because I feel that I would understand the culture better. There were people in the Chinese community that were having similar experiences like him. Just like the character who came from China and was trying to make a living here by doing illegal sex work. So they were both in the same boat. And that was the intention. And that's why they connected, although they didn't speak each other's language. That's why the film is not about race. It's about the human condition.
For me, it was not a Tamil movie. It's a Singaporean movie.
I am from Singapore, and I'm proud of it. And I want to tell Singapore stories.
I'm very excited about representing as a Singaporean, playing characters that are from my country. People want to know our culture.
And I think it's not just about Singaporeans. I think Singapore is now global. It has invited a lot of foreigners to come and live amongst us. They bring in another layer to the Singapore story. I think it's interesting to explore that as well. Because we have evolved. We are no more that same country we were 60 years ago. And I think it's very important to keep moving with the times and moving with what is really happening in the country.
I think for a small nation to move forward and to globalize is really about looking inward, honoring past stories, but also maybe using cinema as a reflection on the tough decisions that have made us stronger. I know it sounds like nostalgia, but I think it's deeper than that.
Nostalgia is a powerful emotion, right? You watch something and it brings back a certain memory and you develop a certain emotive response.
So we see a lot more filmmakers using nostalgia as this tool to kind of revisit our shared experiences, to revisit our history, and then kind of draw people together to their film, to watch it and experience this thing that we can't experience in real life anymore.
My friends and I tried to locate where Wonderland was. Wonderland was cleared for the open-air car park for the indoor stadium. And I think this is it. This space right over here. This was where Wonderland used to be. Wonderland somehow was very special to me. I used to go there when I was a kid.
My parents would take me to Wonderland. Such wonderful memories for me when I was a kid.
I didn't know that Wonderland existed. My earliest recollection of any kind of amusement park in Singapore was Uncle Ringo. When they would set up that miniature amusement park in the big fields.
The only time I heard about Singapore's Wonderland was through Yi. But similar to how my dad would share these kind of stories with me about Singapore in the past, I simply cannot visualize because I grew up when Singapore was already like that. So I think having a film to show people how Singapore was like in the past and how people behaved back then was very useful for me, and it was an eye-opener also.
有什么 party 啊？爱食过吗？
哇！你时间来个真久，我巴肚淡梅啊，等下ถ่าย你听。来，就来这。
有新的过，来。
什么新的？
新的，错，食啦咯。
请你食，免累啦。
是我的。
You know, Saram speaks a splattering of Hokkien in the film as well as Mandarin. And I think that was what it was in our early days as Singapore came together as a nation.
你应该带我们出去玩，顺便带那个阿路也一起。
对，我赞成。我銀行嗰幾萬塊，你兩件讀書，好好讀就好，啊？
Wonderland is more than a story of father and daughter. It's about the pioneer generation. It's about the generation that built Singapore on their backs. So yeah, I guess in a way, nostalgia is important.
We move at such crazy speed. You see things changing all the time. And maybe because of that, Singaporeans, we are a lot more curious about our past than maybe our neighbors, because it's sort of maybe a way of trying to hang on to something that, hey, is too precious, that's already gone and can never be found. We need to nurture what is uniquely Singaporean.
这菜头粿烧烧的，不好食，牙食。
We eat the cai tao kueh. The subtitles say carrot cake. How come it looks so different? This is ours, right?
I think what makes a film uniquely Singaporean is in its day-to-day Singaporean elements. The uncle downstairs, the coffee shop, like those things are Singaporean to me.
你目睭安尼啊，你是看有无？
我过一日苗，过一日通看咧。
And of course, the multiracial, the multi-religious, the multicultural, everything. That's what Singapore stands for.
就成交
It is actually a way of nation building, if you think about it, because it does bring everybody together, whether you're young or you're old. That, hey, we have something in common that belongs to us. We are Singaporeans, and only Singaporeans can tell our own stories.
Datang dari negara Cina sampai Singapura. Dayung sampan.
Why make movies about ourselves? If you don't have your own movies, it's like a family that doesn't have a family photo album. You have no sense of yourself.
Saman you, my job. You see no, not my job.
We're unique in our way, how we present ourselves, what we do, and our films speak of that. And we should be proud of that.
In the end, it's really about telling stories that resonate and that connect.
I think the Singaporean identity has always been a big question that we never really have been able to answer. And that is very much reflected in our films as well.
But I think having all of these films to watch and inspire us helps us define and understand ourselves better as a society and as a people.